Welcome to Closing the Gap, a conversation where we will have a meaningful conversation about closing the gap initiatives with our esteemed elders, whom I will introduce shortly. Before we proceed, please note that in the unlikely event of an emergency, please follow the emergency staff with the yellow hard hats. To kick off our Closing the Gap conversation, I would like to warmly invite Cliffy Wilson from Kumakaru Cultural Service, who will be conducting the cleansing and welcome to country. Please welcome Cliffy.
Thank you. Good afternoon. How are you all? Oh, you can all hear me all right, eh? Yeah. Does it sound a bit weird or it's all good? No worries. It sounds a bit weird to me. But look, before I get on with the cleansing ceremony and the welcome to country, I just want to start by saying what an honour it is for me to stand up here to represent my family, the wider Kaurna community, but also Kumakaru Cultural Services, which is the organisation I work for, and over the years has been my platform to be a part of the first generation of my family, to relearn the Kaurna language, connect back with the culture, and then to be fortunate enough to come out to events like this and educate about that, but also be an educator in the schools as well over the years. So, you know, here on the Adelaide Plains we are in Kaurna country, but I think it's only right that I welcome you in the traditional Kaurna language. Then I'll go into talking about the cleansing ceremony and we'll get on with that. So I want to start by saying, Nyankina Mena, Ngā Mani. Mani. Nānai Cliffy Tuncle Munacha Wilson. Nagana, Naranjari, Naranga, Nadri, Aranda Miyo. Maribuchanga Gana Mirna, Nai Wangadi Mani Mudnigani Yatana. Nachi Yukandalia Yakandalia, Nachalia. So to translate that, ladies and gentlemen, firstly, welcome. My name is Cliffy Wilson. However, my traditional names are Tuncle and Manacha, so I'll explain a little bit about those. The first one, Tuncle, is my totem. Now this can range from native plants and trees, some native animals across the country, or even some of the tools and artefacts we've created over time. Now, for instance, we have some rules and stipulations that we go by with community. So if you've got an animal, which I do, we can't hunt it, we can't kill it, we can't eat it. If you see it sick or injured, you have to nurture it back to health. That's kind of your obligations in community. Now, I say I was probably set up by the old fellas, and I think they've just thrown me under the bus with my name, because Tunkle's actually the king brown snake, one of the most dangerous animals in the world. So there we go. Appreciate that one. Nah, I'm just joking. But also, Manitra is just my birth order name. So when a mother gives birth to a child, that child is given one. Manitra for me translates to the fourth born and male of my family. So my family are proud Kaurna people from here in the Adelaide Plains, and also proud Ngarrindjeri people from the lower lakes of the Coorong. And we do have very strong connection to the Narangga people back on the Yorke Peninsula, the Nadri on the Flinders Ranges, and also the Aranda people in the Northern Territory of Alice Springs. But it's my honour to welcome you here today and recognise that we are standing on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. So maybe we pay respects to their cultural and spiritual beliefs, as it still is important to the living Kaurna people today. Also want to acknowledge that their cultural and spiritual connection to the land, the skies and the seas that surround and connect us are still as important and still as resourceful to the living Kaurna people today. But also I want to acknowledge this place here, the Adelaide CBD, and its traditional name. The Kaurna people refer to this place as Tanda Ganya. Now for those who don't know what that means, that translates to Big Red Kangaroo Rock, or the dreaming place of the big red kangaroo if we want to be a bit fancier. So I'll use the second one because I like to sound a bit smarter than I am. But I will break that down a little bit for you guys. So Tanda Ganya derives from actually two words in the Kaurna vocabulary. The first one being Tanda, which translates to the big red kangaroo and the totem for the Kaurna people. But also Ganya, the rock. Not Dwayne Johnson, the wrestler and the actor, right? But the ones we could pick up and throw, okay? So the reason we honour the rock, as well as Ganya being our totem, there were two significant stones here in the Adelaide CBD. One in Victoria Square and one in the Convention Centre. Over the years, they were quarried down to build the foundations for a lot of the churches in the Adelaide CBD. But those rocks or stones or boulders, however you want to refer to them, they were significant to the Kaurna people because there was a way for us to recognise cultural campsites or ceremonial grounds. So yeah, that's why we put that together. So when we put that together, Tanda Ganya, it becomes a dream place of the big red kangaroo. But look, also want to pay respects to other Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and First Nations people across the country, but also extend a warm welcome to other First Nations people across the world and those who call this place Wadley, those who call this place home. So I want to extend a warm welcome and acknowledge that your cultural and spiritual beliefs are still as important to your people as well. But look, before I get out of here, I also want to pay my respects to my beautiful elders, some that are here now, and give a special thank you to these elders and for what they've done in their lifetime to pave the way for me to stand up here, speak my language, and welcome you not only to Kaurna country, but a place many people from many walks of life now call home. Absolutely. And I just want to go on with the cleansing ceremony. Can I get a show of hands who's been a part of one before? Yep, a few of you. So for those who haven't been a part of one, it's a very important process, not only here in Kaurna country, but across the country of Australia. So it's a way that we'd welcome guests onto country. It's a way that we'd also showcase a new marking of a new beginning in your life. So if there was a birth or there was a marriage or something happening, we'd always have a cleansing ceremony to mark a milestone also. But this is a way to also have us protected from our ancestors who have gone on into the spiritual world, so they can come back, recognise our scent of country, because everyone's got an individual scent about us, right? Some might smell better than the others, but we don't judge here, right? But so it just marks that individual scent that we have, so our ancestors come down, look after us, and protect us on our journey here on country. So all we do is we kind of, when you're in a rush for work in the morning, you kind of splashing water on your face. That's just a system we've got to use, but we'll start from the waist, over the shoulders, then over the head. Now, the reason we start from the waist is because we believe that seed of our emotion belonged in our liver. So that's why we'll start from there. So I'm going to start with the elders here first with the cleansing ceremony, head around to you guys, and I'm going to head off to get some warm clothes on, all right? So there we go. But look, before I get out of here, I just want to teach you a couple of words, all right? And if you can say them, that would be good. So the first one is Nachalia. Can you say that one? Perfect. So Nachalia just means thank you in the Kaurna language, and I want to thank you for the time, attention and respect you give me while I've been up here, and thank you for obviously being a part of the cleansing ceremony in a couple of minutes. And the last word I want to teach is Nakara. Can we say that? Lovely. So we don't believe in goodbyes in Aboriginal culture. We always think we'll see each other again. I always see my aunties all the time and uncles, don't I? So, we always know that we'll see each other again, whether it's in this life or as we pass on into the spiritual world. So Nakara translates to, we'll see you again when our paths meet. So ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Kumakawa Cultural Services, the wider Kaurna community, my family, I say Nachalia, Nakara, and have a great day. See you later.
Thank you, Cliffy, for welcoming us into the country. As we know from the latest Closing the Gap productivity report released last week, there are a mix of progress and challenges across various sectors. For example, while improvements have been made in areas like live long and healthy lives, social and emotional well-being remains a concern. Additionally, the incarceration rate for adults is worsening in the Justice for All outcomes. Today, we've invited guests to share their stories and provide context for why these outcomes matter to us all. Without further ado, let me introduce our panellists who have kindly offered to participate in Closing the Gap conversation. We have our esteemed elders, Uncle Frank Wanganeen, Kaurna and Narungga elder, Auntie Rosalind Weetra, Narungga, Ngurrjeri, Aranda and Kaurna elder, Auntie Lynette Crocker, Kaurna elder. These are some of the members of the UniSA's Elders in Residence program, or Perkininthi, in which its Kaurna name meaning becoming an elder. And my name is Cindy Larkins and I will be your host. I am the Aboriginal Student Engagement Officer, normally located at the City West campus. I work within the Warringah Student Services. We provide a safe, comfortable space for our students to study. Before we start with our first question, I wanted to kindly remind everyone that this conversation is an open and safe dialogue and to listen respectfully. If you experience any distress today, please reach out to your personal supports. Contact 13 Yarn 139276 or Lifeline 131114. Or please notify a staff member wearing a UniSA t-shirt, and they can connect you with the counselling staff member, Rowena, who is sitting near the registration desk, who's giving everyone a wave. For our first question, we are interested to hear from the panel's perspective what changes you may have witnessed or experienced in your lifetime as a result of Aboriginal people's continued strength and resilience. That's quite a broad question there, and I'm sure you've got a lot to share.
Nina Marnie, everyone. can say Marnie I. Okay? Let's hear it. Marnie I. You'll say that. That means, how are you? Are you okay? You're responding, saying, yes, I am. So that's a little bit more Ghana language for you today. But my name is Lynette Crocker. That's my married name. My maiden name was a very uncommon name called Lynette Smith. And my parents, or one of my parents came from over on the Narunga country. I was born in Moonta. I always thought I was born in Wallaroo, but I was born in Moonta because the women over at Point Pearce were not allowed to go to Maitland Hospital to have their babies. So they had to go to Moonta or to Wallaroo. So that was the first, I suppose, now I understand, the first form of racist attitudes that was heralded towards Narunga people or any other Aboriginal people. But the question is, what are some of the experiences that I've had? Well, when my mother left my father and came into Adelaide, and then she moved to Mildura, her sister was up at Mildura. So we lived on the riverbank over the bridge at Mildura at Baronga. And I went to school there to start with. And then my mother met my stepfather, and we came back to South Australia, and he was on the railways. He went up to a little one-horse town in between Broken Hill and Peterborough, and a little place called Manor Hill, which had 7 houses, a garage and a store and a hotel, of all things. And we were in this hotel, the three of us, one day when I was about, I think I would have been about 12. And my mother didn't drink. And she had a lemon squash, and I don't know, I think I had a lemonade or something. She had a lamb's fried. I don't know what I had, I can't remember, but I could remember my stepfather had a mixed grill. Anyway, the publican comes over and he says, well, I have to ask you whether you have your exemption papers on you, says to my mother. And anyway, well, of course she didn't, and I don't think Mum did have exemption papers, but I know that other people in her family did have exemption papers, because you had to have exemption papers or a decade before that to leave the mission, to be an honorary white, or to get a job, or to even live, or even get any sort of assistance. But anyway, so with that, my stepfather, he never swore, but he could lay his tongue around a few words that weren't very nice to the publican, in saying that he would let everybody know from Broken Hill to Peterborough how racist this hotel was. And, it's always puzzled me that there was no one else in the hotel except us, yet he asked us to leave, So what we really have to change is deep-seated attitudinal racism that started off at the point of colonisation. And then another time, we moved around a bit on the railways, and we finally came back to Adelaide, and we lived in Churchill Road, which is just up the corner. And I was walking there with my two cousins one day, and I got pulled over by the police and pointed me out and said, "Get away from them, otherwise I'll have you up for consorting." And I said, "Well, they're my cousins, you know, so if you want to say anything about it, you can come with me and we'll go home to my place and you can talk to my mother." So then they left. But, you know, that was another time, and we were just walking along in the street not doing anything because, well, we didn't have mobile phones then, and we didn't have any of the things you got now to ring up and have people come and defend you. So that was another time. But I'd like to speak to you later on when the other people have had their shot about closing the gap, in as far as it hasn't closed, it's widened since colonisation. So whether you unpack colonisation and look at that, because there's three groups of people. There's 1/3 that will try and do something. There's 1/3 that won't give a damn, and the others will just go along with the flow. So that's what you're dealing with, and that's what you've got to teach your kids. What sort of a legacy are we leaving for them? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Auntie Lynette. Just refer to the handout. There is a copy of the exemption form from South Australia and New South Wales in the resource handouts to have a look at. Uncle Frank, would you like to share your story or experience?
My name's Frank Wongacha Wanganing. Wongacha means I'm seventh born of a family of 15. So I was born in Wallaroo, and like Lynette said, the closest hospital that in Maitland, they didn't want to have any of the women give birth to their children, so hence that's why I had to go up to Wallaroo. That was the only place that they would allow the Aboriginal women to give birth to their children. So a lot of the women, they didn't even make it up to Wallaroo. They gave it up in the cars going up towards Wallaroo. So that was another issue, and it could have been health issues, and people, had complication with their children and all those type of things that happen if they're going up to Wallaroo. But growing up I was on the mission. Growing up on the mission was one of my best childhoods, because we had a school in Kindy, and being there around our own mob was really, you didn't experience a lot of racism. But and then we had to go to Maitland Area School, and that's where you experience a lot of racism. Even from the teachers, from the kids. So racism has been a really big area where we had to contend with. But also growing up there, and I was more involved with sport, so playing football was a good way of integrating a little bit with the community, with other people. So that was an experience, because like growing up on the mission, because we had our own football team, and they still hold the highest per premiership in the York Peninsula, and it hasn't been beaten to this day. So we were very sport orientated and enjoyed a lot of things. but we done a lot of cultural activities. Everything that go down to the beach on the trucks. So having those sort of events where we all integrated with the community and growing up in that sort of environment is very good because everybody looked after everybody. There was no racism. It was just a pleasant where you felt safe and you just went about things and everybody looked after everybody. But education wasn't very, very good for me. I experienced a lot of racism and didn't get a very good education on the peninsula. But there I come into Adelaide and then I sort of went, had my family and then I went back to education, went on to Tandy College and then I sort of went to TAFE and now I'm sort of, every day I learn something new and I keep reading and learning and just, make a contribution to the community and in Adelaide. So, it's me.
Thank you, Uncle Frank. Thank you, Uncle Frank. Auntie Rosalind, would you like to share some insight into your experiences?
My name is Rosalind Wheatra. That's my married name. My maiden name was Branson. And I was born in Alice Springs. My mum lived up there for some time with my grandmother. The story it's not a story, it's a real life event, a real life activity, a real life constitutional change, the 1967 referendum. And you've got a handout about that. I'm always so pleased and proud to show that my mother, Winnie Branson, was most definitely involved in a big constitutional change for not only South Australia but for Australia. And I've got my sister here, Pat Warrior Reid. There's only 2 of us left now in Winnie Branson's family. She had a family of 6. And every time we talk about our mum, we still get emotional. I'm 70 and Pat's a year older than me, so... But Mum was very influential in Port Adelaide, where we lived. And with this, they lobbied. When I say they, Mum also had a strong group of Aboriginal women. Frank's mother was involved in that. And there was Auntie Gladys Elphick. There's a whole range of strong Aboriginal women back in the early 60s, because our men had to still look for employment. They were still under that exemption. So the women had wanted to make the change and wanted their children to have a better life, a more equal life. So that's what these 3, and I wish I could tell you all their names. There's a photo of the 30 of them on the lawn out here, where they all gathered to make their final bid when they was doing the lobbying for that 67 referendum. And as a young girl, I was only about 12, not even that. We heard all the yarning, all the goings on, because my mother's kitchen table was where everybody met. We were busy making cups of tea for all the old girls, as we used to call them. So we were very privileged, the children of Winnie Branson. We all lived under the poverty line, as most of our families did back then. there was no pensions. We were just relying on the welfare, what did they call them back then? The what? The welfare payments. But then, once you see that photo, that's not the only thing Mum was involved in. She was also heavily involved in starting the community Aboriginal football team here in Adelaide. Frank played for her team, so did a lot of his brothers and cousins. All of my 3 brothers played for that Aboriginal team. It was called the Aboriginal Progress Association side. We were in the amateur league. So, but we just called ourselves the Nunga side. And every Aboriginal young man put their hand up. Auntie Winnie, can we play in your side? Yes. Everyone had a go. And we had some really good footballers in that amateur league. And then Mum tried to get the team into the SANFL back then. Struggle. We never made it. But we were the highest scoring side in the amateur league. So it's not for the want of trying. It was never for the want of trying to be a part of the social scene, the sporting team, the academics team. We kept trying, and here we are. We're still trying because we are resilient people, and we are here. This is our country, right? This is where we belong, and this is where we will stay. So, you know, we heard a lot about what the government done to us. But when I look at this, I'm thinking, what can I do for myself? How can we do it? This is how we can do it, by telling you the story, the strength and resilience of Aboriginal women and men. We won't lay down. We're not a dying race. We're a lively race.
Thank you for sharing that, Auntie Rosalind. Lovely to hear about your experiences. We feel very privileged to hear your story. And the handout again, just reflect back on that for the picture of Winnie Branson. Auntie, I know you've sat down, but we've also got another question for you. We'll just give you a breather for a second, if you like. Since we're here at the City East campus, let's talk about health. On the topic of closing the gap outcome, long and healthy lives, can you share some examples of health disparities from your experiences?
It's really good to share the stories, especially in an academic situation, because we know you have a different way of thinking. I'm an academic. Actually, I graduated from UniSA 30 years ago in obtaining a degree, and I also had a diploma over in the old at Underdale. So, and my sister also is an academic. She does a lot of community work like my mum. She's also got a degree in education. So, like I say, it's not for a lack of trying and fitting in. And that's the same thing that I was involved in 2006. Now, I bought this, it's a copy of what we did, the South Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Cancer Forum, which I was heavily involved in September 2006, because I had a bit of a fight myself with cancer for about 2 years in the old Royal Adelaide Hospital, and so in 2006 I was able to get back on my feet again, and I thought, you always feel like you want to give things back and this was part of that plan. So we called it Perka Nguridi, healing messages for not only us as Aboriginal people, but for the hospital, for the medical centres, for the GPs, for the specialists, podiatrists, any other person involved in that medical situation. And this was the very first one that was ever held in South Australia, the Cancer Forum in September 2006, which was, the Working Party insisted that we bring in Aboriginal patients, carers, families, besides all the medical doctors, GPs, radiology people, whoever was involved in that cancer situation at the time. And it was very well received. It ran over 2 days. There was 15 recommendations out of here. And why we feel so proud of this is that they looked at having 2 positions in the Royal Adelaide Hospital, especially for cancer patients, especially for Aboriginal men and Aboriginal women. Because we found, myself, I found it extremely hard to work through not only the jargon, we all know medical people have a different jargon, the same as us educational people have a different jargon. But I found it difficult because I was a patient, not a very good patient, but so it was helpful to then set up this workshop to say these are the difficulties I encountered. And I'm sure other Aboriginal patients would have encountered some of those difficulties as well. So that's why this was born, if you like to say that. And we had a lot of good feedback. One of the things I especially talked about in this forum was Aboriginal healing. And we called that Aboriginal healer is a nunkari. And I most definitely had a nunkari to help me. My story is my doctor, he was a lovely doctor from the Royal Adelaide, my specialist, the cancer specialist. He said, we've already got you lined up for your chemotherapy. I said, Dr. Hoy, I said, now you have to wait. I said, because my brother-in-law, who's a nunkari, he's going to come down and heal me. But it took 2 weeks and the doctor kept ringing, my family kept ringing me. I said, I can't do it until I'm ready to go. So that evening my brother-in-law came down and sat in my lounge room, him and his wife, and they done their healing on me. And the next morning I said, Doctor, I'm ready to go. He said, hurry up. We've been waiting for you for 2 weeks. He was such a really lovely doctor. So I had some extensive treatment, chemotherapy, had a stem cell transplant, radiotherapy. So I knew just about a lot about cancer, which I didn't know about before. Hence the Cancer Forum, to share that information. But the main thing I got out of it was I believed in my doctor, I believed in my cultural healing, and also prayed a lot. So thank you.
Thank you, Aunty Rosalind, for sharing your experience with the Working Party membership. Uncle Frank, would you like to speak to the audience about the forced removal of culture and on the missions and the reserves?
Growing up on the mission, Point Pearce mission, a lot of our mob, they did practice culture, but so it was under the supervision of the what do you call it? Superintendent. So the superintendent, he was the one that very much controlled who lives in the house, who comes on the mission, and who goes off the mission. So he was the main person that had policies that sort of what he had to enact. So growing in that sort of environment, you see a lot of the oppression that our mob were under. Not being able to go out, and a lot of them had to go outside the missions even to get work. So employment was pretty much well sort of attended at the missions, and then they started bringing in those sort of integration stuff, and a lot of mob moved off the missions, and they end up getting menial jobs on the wharfs, working on councils and all those type of things. So the opportunities weren't around that as they are today, and now you see a lot of our mob now, they're getting educated, and hence here at Adelaide Uni and Uni SA and Flinders, a lot of our mob are getting educated, which is really good, and they're making a real big difference. Once they get out on the workforce, and then they're able to make life a bit better for their families, and do things that they enjoy. So coming here and seeing a lot of our mob in unis and being on the committees has been really inspiring, and looking at our mob getting educated and knowing that they're going to go out in the communities, and they're going to really make a big difference. So.
Can you talk about the bush tucker, the impact of and instead subjected to sugar and flour?
Yeah, well, a lot of our mob are starting to really get back into native foods, and they're starting to harvest. So I think a couple of the footballers, I think they seen it on the TV over in Kangaroo Island. They're growing their native foods, plants, and all those type of things. So a lot of them are starting to get involved with using the native plants and getting that out to the wider community, because it's not only for Aboriginal people, but non-Aboriginal people are starting to use native foods and plants and growing those things in their own backyards.
Very different to the sugar and flour rations.
Yeah, they're more. They've got a lot of vitamin C and all that sort of stuff there in them. Yeah.
Thank you, Uncle Frank. Annie Lynette, would you like to talk about your experience?
I suppose on the prompted notes here it says about Penindi. Well, I don't know if you all know. Do you know where Penindi was? It was over on Port Lincoln, and it was the first experiment that the colonial manipulators put us all on, took us off country and moved us all over onto Penindi, where people got mixed up. Some people married wrong way, and they're now going to dig up Penindi, the cemetery over there, to see who's who in the cemetery. Another disgraceful display of colonisation. Anyway, what has happened since people have gone to Penindi is that I'm talking about 5 generations ago, right? Where our forefathers were all taken off country, moved over to Penindi, and they were taught how to be farmers. that was the experiment. Teach you how to be farmers so that they could put you on a mission where you could milk a cow, run a piggery, do all those sort of things. But all those sort of jobs, there would only be about 4 or 5 jobs on the mission that people could do, and then the men had to leave the missions. But on the missions, there were rations handed to you, like tea, flour and sugar. Yeah, very nutritious stuff, to live on. A lot of our people, or my father, was a traditional fisherman, and he lived when he come back from the Second World War through New Guinea, where he got malaria, and he lived on a beach just out of Point Pearce, and the beach is called Hollywood Beach. And I know when I came into Adelaide, they said, "Where do you come from?" And I said, "I come from Hollywood." And they said, "Oh, yes." And it's not the Hollywood that you know as Hollywood, but I thought it was. I thought everybody went fishing, went cockling, went periwinkling. And I can know my mother cooked shag's eggs over on Shag Island, right? And they were a beautiful blue when they were raw, but they were just like an ordinary egg when they were cooked. But I thought everybody tripped along the sand and enjoyed themselves like that. But my father had a boat, and within the boat, I think he had a well, and I think I must have fallen in the well when I was little or something like that, because I used to hate getting my head wet. Couldn't stand going out beyond the reef, and he'd have to go beyond the reef to go to Port Victoria to sell his fish, and I'd always ask, are you out beyond the reef? It sounds like a song, I know. But and he'd say, "No, my daughter, I'm not." Because, anyway, there's some of the childhood memories that flash back to you every now and again. And then another thing about racism and stuff like that. Now, my father was a returned soldier, but he was never afforded a soldier's settlement like any of the other soldiers that went overseas. So there's that I have to take up with the powers that be. But just getting on with, how everybody lived. They lived in tin shacks, and why they went down to Hollywood Beach was when the mission had they must have had measles or mumps or something like that, and so the mission had to be cleared, and people lived in tents down on Hollywood Beach. But there was not only our family that lived down there, there was lots of families like the Taylors, the Crosses, and other old family names that lived down there, but never went back onto the mission afterwards. They refused to go back to the mission. Now, my mother was on the mission too, and she went to school with Arnie Myrtle Kite and all of those older people of that era. And she was taught a 3rd grade education, because the education system back then was whoever the overseer's wife was. She was the one who did the education then, but I believe it's changed now that they do have a school, and they did have one of the first qualified teachers, I think was related to Frank, Alice, Alice Rigney, who taught and ran the school over there. Anyway, getting back to the experiment that was done, like not everybody knows about this experiment, like everybody doesn't know about how this state was founded either, through the lettuce patent and what King William IV did in 1836, set aside land for us, which they've systematically taken off all Aboriginal people. Now, the lettuce patent is for all Aboriginal people, and it's for the 53 language groups that exist in South Australia. There's some of the topics or the research articles that you should be researching in if you want to get some truth-telling told. Okay, thanks.
Thank you to Auntie Rosalind, Auntie Lynette and Uncle Frank again for sharing your experiences and stories. They were very informative and personal. Do we have any questions from the audience? Is there anyone that would like to ask a question?
I just wonder, I'm Pat Warrior Reid, I just wonder if our panel could actually inform the crowd if the Closing the Gap has actually worked for us Aboriginal people in the community. Thank you.
Pat Warrior Reid, you asked a question, but I think you already know the answer to it. Let everyone know? No, there are gaps in closing the gap. It's not working for us. Do you want to tell them why, Pat? It's because the government in its thinking is that they telling us still today, 200 years, they're still telling us Aboriginal people, grown men and women, how to live and how to do it right. When we tell them how we want to close that gap, they don't listen. In health, in education, even in traineeships. So, guess what we're doing now? We're going to try and close the gap ourselves. We've got now, we did do the election last Saturday for the SA Voice to Parliament. My sister, of course, was in it. We always got to have a Branson in one of these things. Mum would have loved that. But, so that's one way, a small step towards us closing the gap. In health, look, I waited 2 weeks down in my medical centre down in Port Adelaide for an appointment with my doctor, because they're now rotating all the doctors through there's 6 Aboriginal medical centres in Adelaide in the CBD. I had to wait 2 weeks for an appointment with my doctor. Otherwise you can go in, you can do a walk-in, and you'll see any doctor, like a trainee doctor, but you've got to explain everything all over again. So I wait 1 week, 2 weeks, then I'll see my doctor. And some of the things you can ring up now. you can phone in to get a prescription filled. It really helps because we are continually going back to the medical centres to fill that prescription every month. I'm on a monthly prescription. I know Pat is. I can't speak for Cindy or Frank or Lynette. Lynette's right in there. She'll have more to say because I think with her health, would you like to finish off closing this gap? Thanks, Lynette.
Thanks, Rosalind. Well, I think it goes back to, like I suggested before colonisation. But I was going through a few old files before I came in here today, and last week we talked about the Indigenous human rights and how we had a commissioner, Tom Karma, who come from the top end, and he went back to the UN and told them about closing the gap again then. Now that's 3 decades ago. Now what they talked about there was, I don't know, you've probably never heard of this before, but I challenge you all to go and find out and research it. It's about the Paris Principle. And the Paris Principle is now a legal binding process that 143 countries of the world have signed up to. And it's a treaty, right? Now, in the principles for that, it talks about independence, which when we talk about Aboriginal affairs, we talk about self-determination, whether there's going to be self-determination and independence. We don't want to be told by, there's 3 sets of government. There's the Commonwealth, there's the state, and then there's local government that we have to deal with. I can only talk about Kaurna people. Kaurna people goes over 29 councils. So we've got 29 councils to deal with, whereas other groups have 1 council. So that in itself is a juggling act. Some people, some councils are good, and others, like what we've seen, Playford Council, have just decided they don't want to do a welcome to country. And there's another one down at Narracourt deciding that they think the early pioneers should be acknowledged at the beginning of the meeting, and not un-Aboriginal, which I find is highly, highly insulting and just bad manners. But the whole expectation, I suppose, of all Aboriginal affairs is about closing the gap, because, they talk about tiers of government, they talk about all these different things that really is about power and control and how we can control somebody else. Now, I know that's not everybody, and, I've sort of come to the conclusion that there's only 1/3 of the population that are really supporting us. And that 1/3 has to, I think, go back to the beginning and listen to some of the elders, the ones that are left. There's not too many of us left. And to just listen and understand what you're doing. It's the worst new modern day genocidal practices that's very evil. It's very evil, and sometimes it's not all about the money, which everybody says, oh, you've got to have an economic development, you know. You've got to have an economic development. And I think that is what separates Aboriginal people from the rest of the world, is we never had the filthy bunda to start with, right? And, but this is what you've got to learn about. You've got to understand where Aboriginal people are coming from, or where we're going to be going. And then, you know, like this morning when I was reading, like you all do, go to Dr. Google or on the internet, find out about things, about the Paris Principle, and that still stands. That is legally and binding. So I'd say to the new group, you know, challenge them about that as a voice to government, because it's about all the different governments that are in power and control.
Another question?
Hello, my name's Clara Baker, Nivako, I'm Naranjeti Naranga. I just wanted to yarn, and I just wanted you to share your stories. You know, even though we had the Aborigines Act and that piece of paper was forced upon us, but there was a little bit more that my elders shared with that. There was extra trauma that came with that paperwork. And my papa, bless his socks, he worked on the railway lines, and even though he complied with that piece of paper, he still had underlying threats that were delivered when he got back to Rauken if it wasn't at 9 to 5. And if he was a minute over, the Aborigines Act would call the police officers and then say he was 10 minutes over, and then they'd give him a threat that, you know, well, you was 10 minutes over, you better not do it again. But that played a lot on his mental health. He didn't talk about it a lot, but you know, the rest of the family did yarn about it. Like, there was extra trauma and lies put onto that paperwork, even though they complied with it. And I just wondering, you know, like, if you can to yarn a little bit more about experiences that maybe family have had as well, because I think the paperwork, there's more to it, like, there was more stories behind it, grief and loss. You know, you'd have to go and put in a request, and then you'd have to say, yes, I'll be back on such and such date, and that's what most of my family found. But yeah.
Who's your question for? Annie Rosler?
Thank you for asking the question. We might just tie this up as well, if you can respond to that, Annie Rosalind, and then we'll end the session today. So thank you. But certainly, please, as a reminder, please reach out if you'd like to speak to someone or a counsellor to have a yarn, and you can most certainly have a yarn with the elders after the session as well. So thank you again.
That's a great question, because what we're trying to do is just give you a filtered version of the history. But that exemption paper, I remember there were stories when my grandmother, who married my grandfather, lived on Black Point when we lived at Pine Point. My grandmother got so upset, she ripped it up and threw the pieces in the fire. They wanted to exempt her from being an Aboriginal woman. That's what you want to know, and that's what happened to all of us. We all felt the hurt and pain and grief and loss, and that came from our grandmother, right? It wasn't an easy thing. You had a paper, you showed it to the police or the superintendent, they looked at it. No, you're out of line. I'm going to ring up the police. We had no rights. So you are right to bring that question up, because I know that. And but it hurts sometimes just to keep talking about it. So I'll hand you over to Auntie Lynette.
Yeah, well, there was a pushback with the exemption paper from even a lot of people, you know, like, say, the top end of Australia used to say the Southerners gave in, you know, we didn't fight or we didn't stand up, which is not true. It's not true because our forefathers did stand up. They stood up with integrity in a silence, you know, because we're not sort of vicious people. It's only, you know, the cause. It's like, you know, that stress you were talking about, and that it's intergenerational trauma that we're all experiencing. And I know some young people are saying, you know, they're angry. I said, what are you angry for? I don't know. I'm just angry. They're angry because they don't know who they are. They don't know where they come from. And they don't know which ground they can stand on with authority. All right? And, you know, that's all part of knowing who you are and where you come from and your identity. Now, it matters to Aboriginal people, but it sort of doesn't matter that much to non-Aboriginal people. They don't understand the kinship. They don't understand sharing and caring. It's all about, it's not about the needy anymore, it's about the greedy. And it's all about what they want and all they want is our land. And they don't understand the concept of how Aboriginal people feel about the land. The land belongs to everybody. You look after the land will look after you. But, you know, everything that is tried, like you mentioned about the bush tucker, and then it comes up about intellectual property right. Well, that's been in breach for years and years. Like in Darwin, there was a billy goat plum, and it's now called the Kakadu plum, so that the pharmaceutical people can manipulate it and, you know, commercialise it so that they're earning money. That's all they think about. You know, they don't really think about the land. And I'm terrified about what this government's going to do down at Port Adelaide with the AUKUS and how you're going to deal with radiation and where that rubbish, and, you know, they've just about destroyed Gilman down there in the Port River without that. So, yeah, I'm terrified about that. And where's global warming? Where are they even looking about that? But this is what Tom Calma talked about as closing the gap 3 decades ago. So, you know, it's not about changing the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's about having a new fundamental process that actually works, and it must work in the other countries because Australia is in breach of that Paris principle. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input, Auntie Rosamond, Auntie Lynette and Uncle Frank. Appreciate the question. Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening today.